my mic. It's very tinny and not much bass to it. Is there any equalization you can do? Do you see how it's kind of, at least in the monitor, it's more trebly than bassy, and it's even picking up my every time I swallow.
There's a lot of like tisking,
Yeah, it's like
unintentional tisking.
Yeah, so I don't know. Yeah, it's very noticeable today.
O Lamb of God, I come, just as I am, and waiting not to rid my soul of one dark blot, to thee whose blood can cleanse each spot, O Lamb of God. I come desperate to be rescued. I come empty to be filled. I come guilty to be pardoned by the blood of Christ the Lamb. And I'm welcomed with open arms, praise God, just as I am, just as I am. I would be lost, but mercy and grace my freedom brought, and now to glory in your cross, O Lamb of God, I come, I come. I come broken to be mended. I come wounded to be healed. I come desperate to be rescued. I come empty to be filled. I come guilty to be pardoned by the blood of Christ the Lamb. And I'm welcomed with open arms, praise God, just as I am. I come broken to be mended. I come wounded to be healed. I come desperate to be rescued. I come empty to be filled. I come guilty to be pardoned by the blood of Christ the Lamb. And I'm welcomed with open arms, praise God, just as I am. Praise God, just as I am.
Yeah, Rich, whatever you did, that's much better. Much less mouth noise going on in this one.
Testing.
I also can't really hear Rachel if that.
I was gonna ask if you needed a little more, or how loud you thought I was in comparison for like
I
balance.
can hear you a little bit. Like
Smidge more?
because you're too-
Hey, Rich. Could I also have a touch more of me in the monitor, please? Thank you.
Thousand times I failed, still your mercy remains. And should I stumble again, still I'm caught in your grace. Everlasting, your light will shine when all else fades. Never ending, your glory goes beyond all fame. Your will above all else, my purpose remains. The art of losing myself and bringing you praise. Everlasting, your light will shine when all else fades. Never ending, your glory goes beyond all fame. In my heart and my soul, I give you control. Consume me from the inside out, Lord. Let justice and praise become my embrace. To love you from the inside out, everlasting. Your light will shine when all else fades. Never ending, your glory goes beyond all fame. And the cry of my heart is to bring you praise from the inside out. Lord, my soul cries out, everlasting. Your light will shine when all else fades. Never ending, your glory goes beyond all fame. And the cry of my heart is to bring you praise from the inside out. Lord, my soul cries out from the inside out. Lord, my soul cries out, Lord. Yes, sit down, Daryl. Daryl is causing his usual amount of trouble. All right, everybody, we will get going here. And as we get going, I want to mention two relevant things that were mentioned in the gathering email that was sent out yesterday. One is more lighthearted. One is more serious. First off, last week, if you were in class, we talked a little bit about communal confession and the need we have to share our shortcomings with others. And so I wanted to begin class with a confession this morning, not to make light of our conversation last week. But some of you have brought it to my attention that in the gathering email yesterday, I did not know my wife's name, that I wrote Lacey Ginnery in the gathering email. So I learned yesterday who reads the emails carefully. But you all also learned who writes them carefully. So yes. So Jim, in line with last week, he checked in and made sure things were okay, as did a number of others here at Lafayette. But yes, Lacey Ginnery is not doing anything today, but Lacey Johnson is. So that's my confession to you. Old habits die hard. We're coming up on 10 years of marriage. The next decade, I'm gonna remember her name. So that's the goal. Yeah, for the next decade. So, and then the other thing I mentioned there that is Bob is good, but it's not lighthearted like we were just doing. If you were here last week, you know this, but we moved the fellowship hall class we were doing over here into the worship center, and we appreciate Bob's very heartfelt desire to serve and teach here at Lafayette like he's done for decades, but he needs to just back out for the time being and rest up a little bit with some of his ongoing health issues he had. So I told him I'll probably remember the rest of my ministry year, the rest of my life, one of the men who said, I'm going to teach till I physically can't anymore, right? I mean, there's something beautiful about that example, and he knew that going in, that might happen, and so I appreciate his example he set for us in that way. But practically what that does mean is we're going to move the class that had been going on in the fellowship hall over to here for the next several weeks for the rest of this kind of block that we had scheduled, which does bring up an interesting situation to try to toe the line of this morning, and I guess even the next couple weeks, that I don't want to do too much review for those that have actually been in that class for that whole time, but I also don't want to do enough review, and then a number of you have no clue what's going on. So I'm going to try to toe that line a little bit. I'm going to err on the side of just making progress into the class. So I'm going to mention a couple things here at the beginning that I think will help those who haven't been a part of this. Just kind of mention some things we would have said the very first week, kind of what we're actually trying to do here, and then we'll jump into some new materials. So this class that's called Ministry in the Image of God, the Trinitarian Shape of Christian Service. If that sounds like a kind of particular title, that's because it is based off of a book that has the exact same title, so that title is not unique to me. And so this is a book study of sorts, except I didn't say you couldn't read the book. I just said I don't know if we've done some book studies where we say, hey, kind of like part of what this is for you to read the book. I would not necessarily see it that same way. If you want to pick this up, you can come see this copy. You can see the information there. You can just look up Ministry in the Image of God. It'll come up. So I'm drawing from that, not exclusively. I'm kind of adding my own material along the way. But just so if this feels like a little bit of like a specific topic, that's because it was a specific book that was written that I found to be helpful in my own thinking several years ago. When I was an intern, I had a minister assign me this book, and even last summer when Trace was kind of doing a volunteer internship for us, I got him this book and asked him to read this. So for me, it's a theology book, but it's also a ministry book, okay? So we want to do both of those things. And that brings us to this next quote I shared. I've spent more time making fun of this guy's name than I did actually talking about the quote problem. I made fun of this guy's parents for naming him Martin Marty. I feel like that was not fair. But this is what the author of the book is talking about as he's introducing his book. And he quotes this other guy. He says, so many Christian books written today are either theologically theological or practically practical. What we need most are books, and I added in there, or classes that are theologically practical. So he's naming something you've probably experienced, that sometimes it feels like when we sit down and we do theology, we're kind of doing theology for the sake of theology, right? And in particular, in this class, when we're talking about the Trinity, we won't go into all this, but we talked some about how when we talk about Father, Son, Spirit, the relationships of the Trinity, it's good, it's valuable, but it can feel just deeply theological. We don't tend to see any kind of study or discussion like that as having any sort of practical relevance. And then we'll also have ministry classes, or we'll have practical applications, and this is what you can do or say, or this is how you can change your life. But if that's not rooted in something deeper, then that also doesn't have as much substance as it could have. So this idea of being theologically practical appeals to me. I mean, that's what he's talking about for this book, but I think for a class, and I shared in there, really, as I think about our whole church, I would love us to be a church that thinks in a theologically practical way, that we are doers of the Word. We're not just studiers of the Word. We're not just in the clouds thinking about theological matters. We do, we act, we're transformed, our lives change, but we do that because of real, theological substance and belief. So what that practically means is that in most of these sessions, and I'm not organizing these all the same way, kind of still just depends on the week and what I want to emphasize. But basically there's 3 movements to each of these classes that I have in my mind, even if these movements aren't obvious like 1, 2, 3 each week. But the first one is to begin with God, and it's to do some theology together, and in particular to think about, literally to think about God as Father, Son, Spirit, to think about the Trinity. And to look at these, what I have up here as basic aspects of the Trinitarian nature of God. And I recognize some of this language is a bit loaded. I think as we go through it, a lot of this feels less loaded. But you can see 7 of the characteristics or the traits that this book mentions. I'm going to draw from several of these. Again, I'm kind of doing some of them in my own way. And the first thing we're doing most of these sessions is exploring this aspect of who God is. And so for 2 weeks, we talked about this idea of relational personhood. If you were in class last week or the time before, we really focused on that this idea that to be a person is to be in relationship with others. And if you want to know why that's the case, we'll just look at God, who is this, as we said, a community of 3 persons, Father, Son, Spirit. One God, but 3 persons in relationship with each other. And so we looked at how God is like that, but then how we're like that, and then what do we practically do about it. So we'll begin most weeks now with just doing 1 per week with one of these aspects of who God is. Today's is called joyful intimacy. And the more I got into it, I realized we're pretty much talking about love. That's what we're talking about with joyful intimacy. So we're exploring who God is. That's the theology, but we don't want to just leave it there. The second thing we want to say is, okay, if we're called to be in God's image, to minister to others in the way God ministers, if our very life is dependent on who God is, then who are we supposed to be in light of who we believe God is? So if the foundation of God's existence, as we'll argue this morning, is joyful intimacy or love, then how does joyful intimacy or love become a foundation of our existence? So we're moving here from God to ourselves because we are made in the image of God and we want to be like Him. And then the third thing, and we can do some of this along the way depending on the week, is just to actually discuss some of this, to wrestle with this, to apply it, and say, okay, if that's who God has revealed Himself to be, this is how Scripture describes God, this is who we want to be, then what does that actually look like for us? And so I have some questions there. Most weeks, these won't be our actual questions, but again, these are kind of the goal questions that I'm wanting us to think about. So even last week when we did the exercise on, what are the challenges we have in these different areas of communal life and how do we grow further? That still fits under this, even though it's a different set of questions. So the idea here is how do I as an individual practice this? So think about this morning. How do I experience this idea of joyful intimacy? How do I experience that with God? how do I experience that in my relationships with others, my brothers and sisters? So how am I already doing that? And then how can I grow? I find sometimes in class it's not always helpful to only focus on how we need to change, because hopefully if you're in here, all of us are practicing joyful intimacy or growing in love with God in some way, right? You're here this morning, you're already doing that a little bit. So we want to account for how we're already doing that, and then how we can grow in a more of an individual way some weeks, depending on the week. And then other times, as we did last week, we'll probably be thinking more communal. So we're saying, how does our church already do this? How do we already practice this? And how can we grow in this practice? So again, last week with that exercise, some of the conversations were on, hey, how are we not confessing as much as we could? Or how are we not holding each other as accountable as we could? How are we not? So those are all growth questions. But I think along the way, I heard examples of how we're also already doing some of those things on that list. So we're accounting for where we're at, even as we hope to grow further. So that may or may not make sense to you, and that's okay, because now you're in the class, so you'll figure some things out along the way. So what we want to do this morning then is to take this aspect of who God is that we're going to describe as joyful intimacy, or if that's too much of a big phrase for you, just go with love. So who is God? He is a God of love. He's a God that demonstrates joyful intimacy. So we'll think about that as it pertains to God. We'll begin to think about that as it pertains to ourselves, and we'll have some opportunity to discuss this as well. So let's jump in here. So the author describes joyful intimacy. He describes it as the foundation of Trinitarian ministry. And as he gets into that a little bit more, he says that this idea of joyful intimacy, or this idea of divine love, is really just the foundation of who God is. Now that doesn't sound too crazy, because I can think of a three-word line from the Bible. I could give you a hint what book, but a three-word line from the Bible that basically makes the case that the foundation of God is joyful intimacy or love. What comes to your mind? A three-word line from Scripture that basically says love is at the core of God, who God is. What comes to mind? God's so loved. I didn't even think about that one. That's a good one. God's so loved. Anyone got another one? You got two of the three words there. God is love, right? I mean, I think I confessed a couple years ago that I had looked back over on some of what I had preached and taught before, and I found that I did not preach on love a whole lot, which might be weird. We're going to kind of teach and preach on love this morning, I think. But that was not a predominant theme in what I focused on. And some of that in my mind was because it's so elementary to our understanding of who God is, right? That sometimes to get up and say, hey, did you guys know that God is love? We go, yeah, we've heard that one before, right? But I mean, I think you really have to step back and go, no, the very existence, the very foundation of who our God has revealed himself to be is that our God is a God of love. It doesn't mean that God doesn't have all these other characteristics. It doesn't mean that God has not revealed himself to be a God of mercy or a God of justice or a God of fill in the blank, all the other things you could think about. But the one trait over and over again that seems to be highlighted is this idea of God is love. And so this is the foundation of who God is. But I think there's a way to think about God as love and to think about it in, again, some of these Trinitarian terms, where before you even bring us into the picture, like God so loved the world, I think there's a way to think about God is love, describing the very heart of God and the relationship between Father, Son, and Spirit. So what we're going to do is we're going to spend a little bit of time here in the Gospel of John. If you want to have your Bibles open, we'll poke around to maybe 3-ish total chapters in John, different places. And I want to kind of do the flow of this class I was just describing, how God practices joyful intimacy, how God is love, how that flows into us. I want to just kind of do all that from the perspective of the Gospel of John, because I think he makes this, I don't think this is a week where we have to look at church history or these careful theological arguments. This really all flows from one of our main Gospels. And you may know John is sometimes referred to as the beloved disciple. He's a disciple who writes about love. There's this reference in the Gospel of John to him being the one who Jesus loved, which is kind of a funny title to claim for yourself. But he's the beloved disciple who loves to write about love. He loves to write about these sort of things. And so while I am leaning towards just calling this love, because that term is so familiar to us, I don't know if it fully captures in our minds, again, this level of intimacy that John has in mind as he writes about Father, Son, and Spirit. And if you've been in our Wednesday night class, if this sounds a little bit repetitive, because we've been sitting with the farewell discourse, which is John chapters 13 through 17, more or less, where Jesus is about to go away and he's praying for his disciples and he's teaching them. And we've noted again and again just how intimate of a block of teaching that is. So we're going to poke around in there for a couple minutes. So this is John 17. If you want to turn to the very end of the farewell discourse, we've actually read this part of the prayer in this class series already. But I'm kind of cherry picking a little bit from a couple of lines he says here in John 17, where Jesus is praying for us, but he makes two references to love that are almost so loud and clear, if you can just sit with them, that we could just end class after you hear these, because it pretty much makes the point. But let's read this carefully. Jesus says in verse 24, or he prays rather, says, "Father, I want those you have given me to be with me where I am, and to see my glory, the glory you have given me." And then he makes the first of two claims I really want you to see here. "Because you loved me before the creation of the world." And so I want you to notice, it is true that God so loved the world that he sent. But according to Jesus here, God so loved him before the creation of the world, before the sending of the Son, before we had anything to do with any of this, per se. It is still the truth that God so loved and that God is love. But this flow of love, Jesus says, was from the Father to the Son before the creation of the world. Okay, that's a big statement about divine love. And it's a big statement that doesn't even involve us yet. It's a community of love. It's a foundation of love between the Father and the Son. And then we'll skip a verse in verse 26. Then it says, "I have made you known to them," Jesus is saying. He's made the Father known to his disciples, and will continue to make you known in order that the love you have for me may be in them, and that I myself may be in them. So now what he's saying is this love, this joyful intimacy that has existed since the creation, before the creation of the world. Jesus says, I am praying that same love would now be in them. Okay? So again, we could kind of end class right now. If you think about that flow of God's love, God's joyful intimacy, and how that is to carry over into us, this is what Jesus prayed for. He said, the relationship that I share with my Father, the joyful intimacy, the love that we have enjoyed since before time began, has been designed now to flow into our lives, to flow into our relationship that we have with God. But as we'll see here in a second, to not only just stay between us and God, but that same love is to even flow out into our relationships with others. This is a pretty, it's kind of like a no pressure, okay? We have been invited to participate in eternal love, eternal perfect love, according to Jesus. Dane? This is agape, I believe. I'm leaving out a reference in John 5 that's interesting. I think it's around John 5:20, 24, somewhere in there. But there's an interesting section in there where Jesus also talks about the Father loving the Son. And there I know he uses phileo because I was reading about that. And again, a lot of you get familiar. And both of those terms are deep terms of relationship. But the phileo, filial love is probably even, in some ways, is even a more intimate family-based type of love. Both words are used in the Gospel of John to try to get at this idea of love. But it's a good point to remember, we're just reading love, 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 love in our English language. And there are shades of this in the actual original language, right? So us saying joyful intimacy or love, you could probably just as easily translate one of those terms as joyful intimacy as love. So there's a couple different terms that are trying to get at the heart of the relationship that the Father has for the Son. So there for John 17, what we've established so far is the Father has loved the Son forever, and that love is supposed to be within us, or it's passed into us. Now let's go back a couple of chapters now. So this is earlier in the farewell discourse, John 15, and we'll see similar language here, but we'll expand the vision a little bit more. So this is John 15:9, which is kind of the beginning of a section, and then John 15:17, which is kind of the end of the section. This is all wrapped up in like the I'm the vine and you are the branches kind of metaphor. So Jesus says, as the Father has loved me, Jesus says, so have I loved you. Now remain in my love. So he, again, pretty similar to what we saw in chapter 17, he's saying, as the Father has loved the Son, which has been happening for forever, he says, this is the type of love I have now shown to you. And he gives this command. He says, remain in my love. You need to stay, we'll talk about this idea in a little bit, being rooted or established in love. He says, you need to remain, you need to root yourselves, you need to establish yourselves in my love. That's your number one goal. And then he talks about a couple of different things. And then down in 17, he kind of makes a turn here to another teaching of John, whether from the Gospel of John or 1 John, that we're familiar with. And he says, and guess what? You all need to love each other, okay? And he doesn't change the terms here. He's not saying, but you all just, you all stink, so don't try to love each other that well. Just do the best you can. No, there's a flow here, right? He says, the Father loves the Son. The Son loves you, and you all are to love each other. And it's the same flow of love intended throughout, to where, again, it feels almost like a no pressure kind of moment, to where you look around the room, and practically, we got to think these things through, but theologically, I think I can make the case that we are to love one another, okay, so ministry or life in the image of God, we are to love each other, we're to minister to each other, we're to be in community with each other with a sense of love that not rivals, but is a continuation of the love the Father has had for the Son forever, okay? Again, that's a pretty high bar to set for the church. That's a high standard of love, and I don't mean that as a high bar in like a legalistic way. I'm just saying that's the gold standard. That's the vision, the ideal we have to look toward, that in our own relationships, in our relationship with God, in our relationships with each other, we're now being called to love in the way that we've been loved. Jesus says, the Father loved me, and so I loved you. And our message is, the Son has so loved us. God so loved the world. He so loved us. He so loved me that I now in turn choose to love others. So this is this is a deep theological vision for the role of love. This is a deep theological vision for this idea of joyful intimacy. Now, real quick, if it sounds like in all this narrating, we have left out the Holy Spirit, because we've been talking about this idea of Trinity in this class, I want to, again, not cherry pick, but just do another cross-reference, a different citation, from Romans chapter 5 that rounds this out in kind of an interesting way. So Paul is doing his own thing here in Romans, but in 5:5 he says, God's love. And I don't know, if we asked Paul in this moment to define exactly what he means by God's love, I think, again, you could make the case what he means is God's love for us, but also the love the Father and Son have shared, because he's been kind of talking about that. God's love has been poured out into our hearts through the Holy Spirit who has been given to us. So again, this is just a reference specifically now to the way the Spirit enters the picture, or was always in the picture. And the Spirit not only kind of mediates the love or the intimacy that the Father and the Son share, now we're being told that the Spirit is what kind of passes on or pours out God's love and actually gives that to us. And so it's the relationship between Father and Son, this joyful intimacy that we're being invited into, if you want to think about it like this. But it's the Spirit who makes all of this happen. And so we're being invited into the intimacy the Father and Son have eternally shared, and we're able to do that because the Spirit pours such love into our hearts. Now, one more reference to the Gospel of John now. This will be the final one, then I'll share a couple quotes, and then we're going to discuss a little bit. This is back in John chapter 1. I would be surprised if we've never talked about this passage before, but this is really where I want you to now think about not just love, 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 but think about this idea of intimacy. So if I could, I would love like 3 or 4 of you to read John 1:18 out loud, and I would prefer to hear it in 3 or 4 different translations. One of you can cheat and read the NIV, which is on the screen. But if I could then hear it, and especially when you get to that kind of middle phrase that's underlined, try to say that loud enough to where others can hear it. So let's get 3 or 4 people to read this. John 1:18. Joel? What? ESV, okay.
No one has ever seen God, the only God, who is at the Father's side. He has made him known.
Okay, so ESV, the phrase I'm going to have us meditate on here is, who is at the Father's side. Okay, let's hear a couple others. Mm-hmm.
No one has ever seen God, but the one and only Son, who is himself God, who is himself God, and is in closest relationship with the Father, has made him known.
Okay, so who is in closest relationship with the Father? Okay, Stacy?
New American Standard Bible. No one has seen God at any time. The only begotten God who is in the bosom of the Father, he has explained him.
Okay, so the only begotten God who is in the bosom of the Father, he has explained him. Anybody else see anything else besides that? Megan?
Common English is, no one has ever seen God, God the only Son, who is at the Father's side, has made God known.
Okay, who's at the Father's side? Rich back there, and then Megan.
New English translation, no one has ever seen God, the only one, himself God, who is in closest fellowship with the Father,
Okay.
has made God known.
Okay, in closest fellowship, that's a different one. And then oh, we're going to get 10 here. Okay, I like it. This is good. Are you seeing that no one's really translating this the same way? That's kind of what I want you to see. Although one of them is correct, technically. Stacy's right. Okay, Megan.
Mine is NRSV.
Okay.
No one has ever seen God, who is only the Son, who is the only Son, himself God, who is close to the Father's heart, who is with him.
Okay, so it's close to the Father's heart. Greg?
King James,
Yes. Yeah.
no man hath seen God at any time, the only begotten Son, which is in the bosom of the Father,
Mm-hmm.
he hath declared him.
He hath declared him. Okay.
New
And the-
Living Translation. No one has ever seen God, but the unique one who is himself God is near to the Father's heart.
Near to the Father's
He
heart.
has revealed God to us.
Okay. So if it's not clear, even apart from the phrase I'm having you meditate on, this is kind of a crazy verse. There are a lot of disagreements about what words even kind of belong in this verse, not in a way that should freak you out, but there's a lot of translation kind of questions here. But the phrase here in the middle is what I really want us to see, but let me kind of walk you through at least kind of how the NIV has it here. This is in John's prologue, where he's talking about the Word who was with God and was God, and he's, again, really talking about the intimacy, the closeness that the Word has always shared with the Father. So this is what he says here in verse 18. That's one of my favorite verses in the Bible, despite the issues. So John says a bold statement. He says, no one has ever seen God. And who he's talking about there, he's talking this idea of the eternal Father. He says, no one's ever seen God. We kind of even understand from an Old Testament way, you can't see God and live, right? That's kind of the idea. So no one's ever seen God. But then it says, but the one and only Son, the only begotten Son, the text says. So now we're talking about Jesus here. We're talking about the Word. Who is himself God. There are some translation questions there. But there's this only begotten Son, and then there's another use of God here. Who is God? And then the phrase is, and is in closest relationship with the Father. This one has made him known. So he's saying this Son, this only begotten Son, who is in some way also God, is in such proximity to the Father that this Son has now made the Father known. He has declared them. He has revealed them. He has given the world access to the Father, who had never been able to see the Father before. But because of that close, proximate, intimate relationship, he and he alone is able to make God known. So years ago, I remember Bob, when he would kind of teach on this idea, he would just say, it's a little tongue-in-cheek, but it's theologically, I think, still fine. But if you want to know what God is like, look at Jesus. Okay, you might have remembered a phrase like that. If you want to know what God is like, you look at Jesus. Because according to John 1:18, there's only one, let's say, person in the universe who shares such a close, intimate relationship with the Father that he could, in a sense, and this is what I imagine when I say joyful intimacy. This relationship that has been shared before time and is now flowing out to all of us. The actual phrase there, KJV's not far off, Stacy's translation is not far off. It's something like this Son, this God who has been in the bosom of the Father has made him known. Being in the bosom of the Father just doesn't mean as much to us. And it is also, it's an idiom. He doesn't really mean that from eternity past there's this baby Jesus of closeness, a level of intimacy, probably more than just about anything you've experienced in your life. Either you holding your own child in such a way or somebody else's child, or if we could remember it, that sense of nearness we have when we were held in the bosom of our parents. I don't think you get much more intimate than that moment. And so this is the level of intimacy that God shares, and that is being poured out into our hearts. Let me show you two quotes here. And then I want to give you a discussion question for our final stretch of time to kind of hash some of this out in our groups. So this quote might have been tough had we not already covered what we'd covered, but I think now it'll probably make sense. And I'm not going to try to say this person's name, but they say, "This is the most beautiful moment of any creature's life, to know that one is loved personally by God. That flows between the Father and Son, enfolded in their love and sharing their passionate love for the world." Again, that's kind of flowery, loaded theological language, but I would argue it is the point that the Gospel of John is trying to make, that this gift of love, this gift of joyful intimacy that has existed between them has now been passed on to us, that we're supposed to experience that in our relationship with God, and we're supposed to experience it also in our relationships with others, which is even probably harder. And then the final one, I couldn't help myself here. You guys can make fun of me appropriately, but you all know my love for Les Mis, and there's this phrase in there that I cannot yet listen to and not weep a little bit, but there's this line, "To love another person is to see the face of God," which I don't believe is actually in the book, but it's in the play. And I think it sums up a lot of the relational stuff going on in the book. But it's this idea that to love, not God in this scenario particularly, but to love each other, to truly love, to truly practice this agape or this phileo love, to truly practice a love that mirrors or echoes or is an extension of the love the Father has eternally shared with the Son. To love someone in that way is to see the face of God. And why is that the case? Because God is love. That only makes sense if God is love. So when we participate in that, we in a sense see the face of God. Jim?
In Matthew 25, Jesus talks about if you fed me, if you did prison, if you did any of these things, you did it to me. I think John 15 would just roll in, and if you love others, you love me.
You love me, right? Yeah. And so this is where when we're talking about love or joyful intimacy now in kind of an application sense, I thought about which direction to go here. But last week we were doing a little bit more of the communal stuff. How do we confess to each other? How do we do all that? There would be a whole set of applications here about, okay, so how do we do that in our relationships with each other? Most of us have a harder time probably practicing this with each other than with God. And so that would certainly be one area of application to ponder. If you are convinced from the Gospel of John, from me, from that person on the prior slide, from Les Mis, that to love other people in such a way is sort of the goal of what we're doing, then hopefully that reframes a little bit how you see the people around you and how you're called to serve them. But I wanted to ponder just a little bit more, and we'll go for about 8-10 minutes here in your groups if you kind of want to be thinking about getting together. But I want to, skipping that. Okay, I want to start here. Ephesians 3:17 is just kind of cross-reference, but when Paul is praying for them, at one point he prays that they would be rooted and established in love. That sounds a lot like what Jesus says in John, that I want you to remain in my love. So we have all this great theological flowery vision for love, 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 joyful intimacy. But there's also some like just practical considerations of how do we actually ground ourselves in that love? How do we become rooted and established in love? It probably doesn't just happen. I mean, maybe it happens to a degree naturally, but it also can take a little bit of work. So in our groups, recognizing that some of this feels a little intimate even when we're talking about our relationship with God in this way. But I want you to think about everything we've discussed so far in class. Love from God, God is love, their relationship, our relationship with God. And I want you to kind of think back on your Christian journey. This can be something going on right now. This is okay if you want to share something from prior times. And think about maybe what practices or disciplines or habits, if you ever had an experience, even a relationship that kind of helped you along these lines, that you feel like helped you become what Paul says, rooted and established in love. So again, I'm assuming that you did not show up here this morning and go, wait, God is love and we're supposed to receive God's love. I am assuming all of us, to a degree, have found ourselves rooted and established in God's love, or we would probably not be here, right? But what has actually, do you think, helped you along that journey? What has helped you to experience or receive, as we've put it, joyful intimacy in your relationship with God? Again, you don't have to, spill your whole heart here in 8 minutes with your group. But in your journey, what has been helpful for you to remind you, to root you in these truths we've been looking at together? So let's finish class by spending some time together. I'll pipe in about 9:48, 9:49 and get us done. So group up around you, 3, 5 people, 6 people, whatever's helpful. Even just 4 people together might be good, and discuss this a little bit.
Take me a minute. Alex and Megan? Right. He's our son. Okay, yeah. So yeah, I thought it was.
You could just text me a long essay on here. Okay.
Another one that I can think of is kind of Alicia has been a really good source. I feel like in my Christian journey, discipleship is very constant, always loves. And if you guys don't know her very well, she's really got never has like attitude
because I think that's a great opportunity to show love. Because when there's not conflict, it feels easy to be loving and caring and kind. But when there's something going on that hurts and is painful, I think the tendency or the easy path is to lash out with those emotions that come to you quickly. But if you take a step back and remember God and how He's always there when we're not, and when we go back, He's there. That's helped me be more loving when I don't feel like showing that love. So that's been helpful for me, at least I felt the most impact in those situations.
Yeah.
It's almost like this is simply processing it, verbalizing the truth rather than that's
When I was coming up with those words, I added in the word experiences because I was thinking, like, if you grow up in any type of church, you do, God is love is definitely going to be one, but I still didn't feel like I had like felt that growing up. And I don't even have an experience one in mind that like was like, that's when I understood God's love. But I feel like it was a series, for me, it was a series of more like actually needing some like more emotional, like heart events, you know, to happen to like really feel or I guess receive God's love would be the theological language, to where then it's like the smallest things can like set it, like even just this morning with the prodigal son, when I like went to read it the other day, I just like cried at first because I was like, wow, you kind of forget if you don't read the prodigal son story, like this is like great. I mean, it's just like pure love that you just can't. But you're close to it. When you're close to it in your brain, you start thinking about all the different things. And there's certain songs, you know, that can just like set you off. That's an experience that just like pricks a little something. So I feel like for me being more left-brained, I need those like heart moments to like feel all the stuff I think. Because I'm very convinced God is love is like the core thing, but I have to like feel that as well. So I think I actually need sometimes more like emotive experiences to draw that out of me.
what have been emotive experiences that you can think of?
Well, now I'm thinking of, more things like just songs and just little readings or example. I mean, having a child is definitely like helpful for thinking through the bosom of a father, you know, but yeah.